You are tuned in to the Week in Review, presented by the Prosper Group, where the right turns to win online.
Join us each week as we take a look at what is happening in digital advocacy and politics with a right of center focus.
Welcome back to the Prosper Group Week in Review podcast. Each week, we cover politics and digital from right of center for campaign professionals, political insiders, elected officials, and first-time or aspiring candidates for office. From the Prosper Group, I'm your host, Dan Huber. On today's show, we'll discuss competitive intelligence with news alerts, digital-first campaigning, and your weekly social conversation update using social listening from the Prosper Group. So let's start with our weekly digital tip. Last week, we talked about posting Labor Day updates to social. I hope everybody had the opportunity to include their experiences in the community on their social media feed. It's always a positive experience. This week, we're going to talk about setting up news alerts. So setting up news alerts are an easy way to gather intelligence and just do some general tracking related to the elected office you're in or that you're running for. Very simple. I recommend using Google Alerts. It's a free, inexpensive way to go about getting alerts. And as you probably know, Google is very proactive about monitoring the internet, what's going on, staying on top of new posts on blogs, on news sites. So it's really a great resource for staying on top of what's happening related to specific things that you're interested in. And you have the option with Google to get alerts based on a frequency of as they happen, daily, weekly. So you have some options as to how you want to receive information. And part of that may just be determined about the level of urgency, the level of frequency, and kind of the level of the race or the office that you're looking at. So I would say that there's a lot of value to staying on top of the new developments. And the other thing that you can really do, which I think is a value add, is you can find out people who are engaged in the conversation about the race that you're looking for. So you're always going to know about kind of the key news members. It's pretty easy to track those down, but there may be a blogger or somebody out there that you weren't originally familiar with that's talking about your race, and there might be an opportunity to either reach out and build some bridges or to be aware of some criticism that's coming from places that maybe don't agree with you. But it's a way to kind of keep your ear to the ground and stay on top of what's going on. So there's a few different types of alerts that I would really recommend paying attention to and setting up. The first is kind of the most obvious, which is focusing on the primary in your campaign. So whether that's you, whether that's the candidate you work for, whether it's an elected official that you work with or for, set up an alert around that person's name. If you have a common name or, there's a lot of people who have it, you might try and, find some way to trim it down around, say, in my case, I live in Indiana. So maybe Dan Huber, Indiana, because quite frankly, there's a lot of Dan Hubers out there. Really look for how can I kind of chop it up in a way that's going to give me, the conversation about me specifically. Although, depending on who you are and how many, the risk level associated with your candidacy or what you're running for, maybe you want to run a broader search just to see if something's being said that even could be confused as to whether it's you or not, or whether it's your candidate or not. So definitely something worth thinking about there. So that's the first search that I would set up. The second is you're going to want to set up searches around your competitors. So if you're in a Republican primary, who are the other Republicans running for office? Set up searches around them. Set up searches around the Democrats running for office, because you're going to want to know what's going on related to the field in general. And, that's definitely an important piece is, what's what's being said by your opponents? Are your opponents talking about things that maybe indirectly point at you, but they aren't using your name? Just be cognizant of what's being said in the race. And it's not, in today's world, it's not as simple as opening up the local newspaper and seeing what's being said in the local newspaper. So this is a great way to do that. So we talked about setting up an alert about you, your candidate, setting up alerts about the competitors. There's probably value in setting up an alert around a specific office you're running for. So, if you're running for the mayor of Washington, D.C., maybe you want to set up an alert around mayor of Washington, D.C. It's probably going to give you a lot of feedback, but, it might be valuable information that's worth sorting through if you, live in a smaller town. So I grew up in Western Nebraska. So, if you wanted to set up an alert for Mayor Scottsbluff, Nebraska, you'd probably get some pretty specific, narrowed down information about that and really be able to see who's talking about this race, this office, the people that are relevant to it. So that's one way to go about it. And I think that's probably a good alert to be paying attention to. And, if you're running for state legislature, say in Texas, if you're in the Texas Senate District 27, you can probably put together a fairly narrow search that might be honed in on that, but you may also want to be looking at things that are more specific to the community. And that kind of gets me to my last recommendation for a search that you may want to set up. And this, I would say, is a little more of a maybe area. So set up some related searches to your priority issues, and kind of how they relate to the geographic area for your elected office that you're in or pursuing. So, going back to Texas, maybe if you're really focused on Second Amendment rights, maybe you set up a search about Second Amendment in Texas. That's going to be probably fairly broad as to what you're going to get back there. So maybe you find ways to narrow it down by honing in on a specific county or something along those lines. So those are things to think about. And that's the other thing that I would look at. And you can refine these over time, and I'll get back to that in a second. But you want to try and right size your search. So do you want to have a really wide net that's going to catch anything related to a specific issue? Or do you want to kind of have a narrow net that really, finds the needle in the haystack that may be valuable to you? It kind of depends on what you may want to do with the information that you're looking for. And on issues, I tend to think you might want to search for a needle in a haystack, unless it's something that, you really want to be out there talking about all the time. So, and touching back with what I was mentioning, once you set up an alert, the nice thing is if you go to Google Alerts in Google, you'll be able to modify, change, delete any existing alerts. You can always create new alerts. So if you don't feel like it's right, if you feel like you're getting a lot of information that's not useful, or there's content out there but you're not getting it, you can always go back to Google Alerts and check that. So a great way to really get intelligence about what's happening in the elected office that you're either in, running for, or working along with. So definitely recommend you check that out. All right, next up, we're going to talk about taking a digital first approach. So, it's 2021, we're almost to 2022. We've talked about this many times, but digital campaigning is campaigning. And, that really leads into this conversation about taking a digital first approach. Digital first, what it means is providing as digital of an experience from beginning to end as possible, with interactions, working with people. This may be working with your voters and volunteers who are online all day, every day. In a digital age, campaigning is the result of all the advancements that we've made over the years and digital builds on all these things. So, I think back to, I worked on a campaign in Virginia once, and we had a volunteer who, when he was younger, had worked on campaigns and talked to the candidate that I was working with and said, hey, I'd like to, help out with the voter contact, and came in and had, these grand plans to take phone books, and from those phone books, he was going to make call lists and do door-to-door, block walking, door knocking, depending on what you call it, what your local kind of approach to that is. But he had this grand plan for taking phone books and turning them into these voter contact approaches, which, back in the day, that's what they had. That's where the storage of information was. But over time, we get access to voter rolls digitally and have the ability to know, like, who are likely Republican voters and who do we need to reach out to in the Republican primary, these sort of things. And so, to make a long story short, he started seeing the data sets that we were using to look at kind of voter contact or whatnot, realized that, the progression of technology and the innovation that we've been working on, it really passed his experience by. He was a great volunteer. He helped out a lot, but, quickly realized, okay, you guys have a process and approach here that's working, and we're not going to mess that up. And was a great team player. And education's always really valuable when you're trying to work with people, but digital is really about finding new innovative ways to really do what you need to have accomplished from beginning to end in your communication and your interactions with voters, volunteers, supporters, even the people that you don't agree with. How do we find a process and a system to do that consistently? And to start thinking and moving forward to today, over the last year and a half, 2 years, as we've adjusted to the pandemic, I think voters today are more accustomed to digital processes than ever before. People are using their smartphones and going online to order groceries, to order food from the drive-through. They get confirmation via SMS of the order updates. And these are all digital first experiences. How can we make interactions as digital as possible? And we're seeing more and more of that in our society, A, as we adopt more technology, but B, as we're able to do more and more with our phones, with our computers, and so forth. Now, at the Prosper Group, we take a digital first approach to everything we do, particularly for campaigns, and think about how we go about closing loops from a digital standpoint. So fundraising, for example, let's think about, with fundraising, a digital first approach is you would go forth with your ask, your call to action to donate, using something like an MMS text or an email. You'd send people to a donation page that's digital. It'll process the contribution, maybe offer an upsell, and there's ways to digitally fulfill the item or send it to a fulfillment company that takes the request, the order for the pair of socks or the bumper sticker that was sold in the process, and will automatically print the label, send it out, and you don't even have to touch any of that along the way in the process. And once the contribution's made, your contribution tool is depositing your money directly into your checking account. It's there. The reporting is available. In the meantime, the donors are getting a digital receipt. They're getting a digital thank you. It may be, you can talk about the impact or value of their contribution. If you want, you can include a video message from the candidate. You could swap these out every month, just saying, I really appreciate your most recent contribution. It goes a long way to making our movement happen in the way that we want it to. All of these things can occur via email. You can send confirmations via text messaging, but at the end of the day, we're able to accomplish so much with a digital first approach that, previously would have taken a lot of time. So in 2021, just as digital campaigning is campaigning, digital fundraising is fundraising. If you're running for office and you're fundraising and you're not doing digital, you're missing out, especially on the small dollar fundraising. There's so much that it can occur, and you should really be looking into doing that, doing your prospecting, that sort of thing. Take another use case, events. So digital first events process, you could send an invitation digitally, whether that be email, SMS, whatever messaging approach you want to take. You can take them all, actually. People can RSVP online digitally. You capture all the information you need to have them come to your events. You can send out a confirmation email, has all the details, very easily conveys that. You could even include a calendar invite in your confirmation email. And then on top of that, you can send a reminder message, whether it's via email or text. And the day of, you can send a confirmation text. Are you still coming? Doing that head count, making sure that you have a good sense of what's going on. And you could even automate some thank yous after the fact. So, the other thing that's important is, I think one of the concerns with digital first approaches might be some people being concerned that the personal touch gets lost. So I think that that's a valid concern, but what's important is you don't have to eliminate the personal touch. You can send thank you letters for contributions in the mail, even if you send a thank you email. You can send follow-up phone calls and just say, hey, really appreciate what you did, or that you came out. Like, those personal touches can always be added in, but taking a digital first approach will add efficiency and professionalism. You can do something similar with GOTV, doing, regular updates, outreach. But one of the things that I would say is if you're going to put together digital systems that gather information, try and avoid duplicating the same process in multiple platforms for the same person. So I'm going to kind of take this to a health story. So my health provider, I get my annual checkup, and for the longest time, they would send me a text message and say, hey, fill out these screener questions to save you time when you get to the office. You go through, you answer about 10 questions and you submit it, and they say, great, we'll see you on Monday. And then on Monday you go in and they started handing you a tablet and you had to go through and fill out all the same questions. Well, to me, that tells me either you didn't get the information that you originally asked for, or you're not organized enough to be able to know that it's already there. And so for me, I just stopped filling out the text message version, even though the whole point is to save time when you get there. But if you're going to duplicate the process on multiple occurrences, then you're sending the message that you're wasting people's time. So where you can, definitely try and avoid any of that duplication that's not necessary. And again, if you have great digital first systems, that shouldn't be a problem. So, it's also important to note, and I think I touched on this briefly, that for campaigns, just as businesses, time is a real commodity. The time of your candidate, the time of campaign staff, time of volunteers, you want to use it all wisely. So the more you can take digital processes to eliminate campaign time, even to schedule volunteers, if you can do that digitally, you're saving yourself some time. And taking a digital first approach to your campaigns is very important because, again, as I mentioned, and which we've been talking about all year long, digital campaigning is campaigning. So definitely take a digital first approach to what you're doing. All right, well, we're going to wrap up this week the way we do most weeks, talking about the AM Rundown powered by Social Listening from the Prosper Group, where we daily send out updates about social trends and politics and digital best practices. So at the end of the week, we wrap all that up and talk about what's been going on in the social conversation that we've been tracking, and give you a little bit more than what we necessarily send out in the AM Rundown. But if you want to stay up to date on what's happening daily, I would definitely encourage you to look up the AM Rundown and sign up at prospergroupcorp.com/AM Rundown. And we always include a link to that in the notes. But we're going to start today talking about the filibuster conversation. So this dropped off slightly this week. It's down 39%, but there were still 151,000 mentions on Twitter. So definitely continues to be a sizable conversation there. But I do think there's just a lot of backslapping going on, but certainly a persistent conversation that's occurring on the left. One other item that we've been following very closely each week in this location is gas prices. So last week, or this past week, ending September 7th, we hit the highest price for gas since October of 2014, with the average price per gallon of $3.17 and 0.6 of a cent. That's up 3.7 cents this past week. Conversations actually down 2%. And I think part of that's just that we saw a big surge going into the holiday weekend, as we would expect over a 3-day holiday when people are hitting the roads and gas prices have been going up. So that's gas prices. And then looking at the Afghanistan conversation around withdrawal of troops, the conversation's down 52% this week. And I think part of that's due to some other things that are really gaining attention. And, just that most of the action is occurring offline and behind cameras and away from cameras right now. We looked this past week at Texas elections, and that was really driven by the voter integrity laws that were being passed, or that were passed in Texas and signed by Governor Abbott. That conversation's down 6% this week. Probably stop tracking it, as I think there's a lot of other more interesting things going on. California recall topic is up 34% this week, with the actual election occurring. I believe it's this coming Tuesday, but definitely this coming week. We saw 43.1 thousand retweets there. And then new this week, we've added the Texas abortion conversation. So this conversation actually really started trending at the beginning of September as the heartbeat protection bill went into effect in Texas on September 1st. And that act, has garnered a lot of attention from the left. And we heard from Attorney General Merrick Garland yesterday that the administration is filing suit against Texas over the legislation. So that conversation, while it's significant and measurable, 961,000 tweets in the conversation this past week, it's actually down 25%. But we're going to track it at least for a week or two to see how it goes, because I think it's going to be a somewhat sustained conversation there. So definitely interesting to watch that one. Definitely would encourage you to pay attention, as we'll be paying attention to it too. So, well, check back each week for tracking and analysis of social conversations around important topics of the day. We, make a point every week of looking at what's going on out there and trying to add in conversations that are important and moving on from those that are dying off. So if you're interested in receiving the AM Rundown in your inbox every weekday at 7:30 a.m., go to prospergroupcorp.com/AM Rundown in your web browser and sign up there. But as always, we thank you for listening to the Prosper Group Week in Review. It's produced and published every Friday. So subscribe, enjoy your weekend, and download again next week. Thanks.
You can find our Prosper Group Week in Review podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
If you like the show, please subscribe and share.